for today's session, and thanks for attending.
Thank you, Taylor, and welcome everybody for our first summer series speaking engagement. Again, we want to thank Doug Carr, a personal friend of mine, as well as fellow Saluki from our alma mater, SIU, and excited to hear. I've heard Doug speak in the past, and have gotten quite a bit out of it when that's happened. So I'm excited to introduce him as today's guest speaker, as Taylor said, from the NBAA, and share a little bit about Doug's experiences and what information he can bring to all of you. So without further ado, I would like to present Mr. Doug Carr. Doug?
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Taylor. It's a real privilege and pleasure for me to be here today with the NIFA crowd. It's always great to connect with the front lines of aviation, because here in Washington, D.C., we get sometimes described as the great oxygen-free zone, which describes the craziness that happens here in Washington. And what happens out there beyond the beltway of Washington, D.C. is the real world. That's aviation as we know it, as we live it, as we breathe it, and connecting with the front line of aviation, for me, is one of the best parts of my job. Unfortunately, for the last year or so, we've sort of been stuck at home. I haven't been doing any business travel for at least 16 months, and maybe another few months before we actually start up again and start doing some business travel. But I can't tell you, my frequent flyer account is going to thank me, because it's nearly empty, having put some of those miles to use for some personal travel, but anxious to get back out on the road again once everything on our side and the corporate side starts saying it's okay for us to do that. Just a little bit about me. I've been with NBAA for, going on about 25 years. It's been a really great ride for me here in Washington. I actually came to Washington on an internship. I was trying to choose between an airline internship and an internship with a friend of mine who started work here in Washington. And I thought that Washington wasn't going to be the traditional path. So I figured, why not? Let's give it a try. And by the end of the internship, which was actually between my junior and senior year at SIU, I had a job offer and had to decide, do I take the job or do I do something else? And I decided to take the job, finish school remotely. And that's sort of, as they said, that was that. Everything else has been really focused about here in Washington. I started at SIU, good old Carbondale, Illinois, thinking that I was going to fly something with 4 engines with hundreds of people and fly all over the globe. It's just interesting to see where life takes you and the opportunities that you don't think are going to be part of what you do, having such a big impact on where you end up finding passion, not only for your job, but also in life. So this has been an interesting ride for me. It has been extremely fulfilling. Today, I get to lead a great team of people who are the front line, the sharp end of the spear, the pointy end, so to speak, when it comes to dealing with helping make sure that our regulators, think of that as broad a term as you can, whether it's here in the U.S., the FAA, Customs and Border Protection, TSA, Department of Homeland Security, IRS, Department of Transportation, you name it, that they understand and appreciate the needs of the members of NBAA. NBAA represents business aviation, and we've got almost 11,000 members that belong to our organization. And my part of the organization helps to ensure that their interaction with the government, the rules and regulations that they follow aren't overly burdened, aren't overly restrictive. As new proposals come out, we're deeply engaged in making sure that they're reasonable, they make sense, and where we need to, we fight back as hard as we can. But where we can, we support good rulemaking and good policy as well. I also have a real privilege of doing what I do here in Washington and other parts of the globe. So whether it's at ICAO up in Montreal, over at EASA, the European Aviation Safety Agency, which has its headquarters in Cologne, Germany, Beijing to interface with CAAC, the Civil Aviation Agency of China, down in Brazil, wherever it happens to be, wherever the needs are. we have an ability to get there and interface with regulators and policymakers so that our members have an understandable and easier opportunity to use their aircraft that they invest millions of dollars in to do the business of the company wherever it might be in the world. It's great to work here. Washington is a lot quieter these days. The streets outside still haven't returned to the normal hustle and bustle that we're used to, but there are signs of life. And even today, we just wrapped up a call with our whole team here to talk about what a voluntary reopening is going to look like. We expect, starting after the July 4th holiday, to give all of our staff an opportunity to come back to the office. They've all been working remotely since March of 2020, a really long time apart, and hoping by the end of the year, we'll start to see a lot more of our team a lot more regularly. Great news is we've got a big show that some of you may have heard of that's happening in October. We're looking forward to coming back face to face in a strong a way as ever. So if we can probably talk about that during the course of the chat today. But man, I think many of us are just so anxious to get back out there again, see each other, reconnect, reestablish those relationships that so far have been very two-dimensional, courtesy of this screen here, and keep doing the great work that we're doing face to face. So I know that's a little bit of a weird introduction there, but Andrew, that's the high level. Let me turn it over to you for where we might go with some of the Q&A today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that brief overview of your roles and duties, how you got to where you are. I actually, on that note, speaking about the NBAA Convention that's coming up, before I forget about that, why don't you talk a little bit about that, what it does? I mean, we're coming into the air show season. Sun and Fun kind of revitalized and kicked everything off a few months ago, and we're coming, Oshkosh is going on and everything like that. So why don't you talk a little bit about the convention?
Yeah, sure. Well, before we get to October, I'm very anxious to see that Oshkosh is back on the calendar. I know I'm going to have a chance to go up and spend some time there with our members that show up there. Oshkosh is a very important event for the industry over the course of a year. Great opportunity. I'm sure many of you have been there that are listening today, and I would encourage you to get back if it's possible for you. NBAA has an annual show here in the U.S. as well. We have the claim to fame of being the largest purely civil aviation trade show in the world. We don't do military, we don't do space, it's just purely civil aviation. This year it'll take place October 12, 13, and 14 out in Las Vegas at the brand new West Hall of the Las Vegas Convention Center. Just opened a few weeks ago. The World of Concrete, believe it or not, Concrete has its own trade show, was the first show to occupy the new hall. There will be several shows that happen there before we get there, but man, we're very excited to be out there. We're going to have a full trade show floor. We're probably going to have about 100 new and for sale aircraft out at the aircraft display located at Henderson. We'll have about a half dozen, maybe a little more aircraft on the trade show floor itself. We're going to have an awesome AAM display, advanced air mobility. Think about all those things you've been seeing about from Uber and Lyft and others that are getting themselves into the AAM space, urban air mobility space. We're going to have several of those on displays there. It's going to be a really forward-leaning, awesome event to bring everybody back together. We can't wait to get out there. We've got some student pricing as well that really helps make getting in very, very easy. So happy to take any questions, perhaps offline, about what we can do to make a NIFA member access to the show as easy as possible, because we want you all to see what the future of aviation is all about. If you can get to Las Vegas in October, I know it's during school, it's well worth a visit, especially if you may be looking at some near-term employment. Those job opportunities that happen at the show really are second to none.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, we'll connect. So my first question, and we'll go right into this, it has to deal with, you talked a little bit about Carbondale, but you're also a Navy vet. Can you kind of talk, some of our students and competitors will either do, maybe serve beforehand, some will go to university and serve afterwards. Can you kind of speak about those experiences in both going through the service and then through through college, and talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my collegiate experience, I would say, was probably quite non-traditional. In fact, that's what I was labeled when I got to SIU, as a non-traditional student. I served in the Navy for 6 years before coming to Carbondale, and I was a nuclear technician on board a submarine. So I got to operate, repair, take care of, train on the submarine reactor system. So the 2 years of school that led up to my first and only assignment on the USS Norfolk, based out of Norfolk, was pretty intense. The schooling was designed to find a way to fail you out. That's how rigorous they are. GPAs, if you want to equate it to a GPA, anything below a 2.5 was not considered passing. So our motto was 2.5 survive. That's what got you through to the next step. But the reality of the schooling in the military was that it was part of your job. Studying was part of your job. And so literally after a day full of classes, maybe an hour or two break at the end of the school day to go to the gym or to get a bite to eat or to make a phone call, you were back in that classroom for 4, 5, or 6 more hours that evening. And your day probably ended around 10 o'clock at night. It was a long day, and that was your week. Because you knew that the consequences of not moving on were significant. I wouldn't get kicked out of the Navy. That was never an option. They would find a way to use me, but probably in a capacity that I didn't want to be used in. So there was significant motivation to remain engaged, to study hard, and to continue on. If there's anything the military taught me, it really was how to study. I know coming out of high school, I'll admit I was a pretty terrible student. I think my GPA leaving high school was somewhere just south of 2.0. I mean, a pretty bad student in high school. And my first year of college before the Navy really just reinforced that. Unfortunately, I didn't have good discipline. I didn't have a good study habit. I didn't know how to prioritize. And that's what, in this case, the military left me with in terms of a skill set: how to prioritize, how to study, how to focus on what's important. And so coming to Carbondale, it was probably significantly easier for me to find a way to succeed in a collegiate environment following that pretty strenuous naval nuclear training school that I'd been through. So my first semester there with 12 credit hours, I kind of felt like there was a lot of unused opportunity in terms of my time during the day. And so second, third, fourth semesters down there at Carbondale, I probably averaged 21 to 24 hours because that's what I felt I could handle. And professors and advisors really said, "What are you doing? That's too much. You're not going to be able to handle it." And at the end of the day, everything worked out just fine down there. But that made things like understanding systems. My Navy work helped making things very understandable: hydraulic systems, pneumatic systems, electrical systems, the cable and pulleys that we're used to dealing with on trainer aircraft. Really quite easy for me to comprehend, understand, and bring into what was my passion, which was aviation. Understanding the flow of coolant through a reactor is important, but it wasn't going to be important going forward. But the systems theory, how systems work, what are the critical components, what happens in failure modes, was really a valuable takeaway for me. So the military was great. At the end of the day, it wasn't where I wanted to be long term, but the skills that I got there could not have been better or more transferable to where I wanted to go with my passion, which was aviation, and get me through college in just over 3 years.
Excellent, thank you. So what would you tell a student who's in school right now, maybe looking to possibly go into the service after school, for a multitude of reasons? What's something that you can what is something you would tell them?
So the military today is very different, I would say, than the military that I joined. Oh, geez, going over 30 years ago. The military today is actively recruiting collegiate aviators, collegiate graduates for a variety of roles. The training leadership development and skills that you get from the military, I would say, really are quite second to none. There's a great appreciation for focus, for discipline, for deadlines, for commitments that you make, because they hold you accountable. There isn't an ability to do the he said or she said or whatever the situation might be. There's a real tangible benefit that comes from any level of military service. So for those that are considering it, if it's a passion for you, if it's an opportunity that you think you may not get elsewhere, I would highly encourage you to pursue that. America needs great, smart people to help lead it, and the military is a fantastic opportunity, and one that I think everyone should explore. And if it sounds good to you, if there's something in there that resonates with you about what you want to get out of life, or a skill set that may be valuable later on, definitely pursue that. In some cases, the commitments may be something that slow people down. I don't know what they're like today. For me, my commitment was 6 years to start, and recognize that 2 years of that was school. So it was really only about being in the fleet and deployed for 4 years. I spent a year of that 4 years literally tied up in a dry dock in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, going through an overhaul. So total time was only about 3 years of active time on the submarine, tied up next to an active pier or out deployed doing what submarines do. But highly encourage the military as a path forward for folks that have some interest there.
Excellent, thank you. So now we're going to transition a little bit to talk more specifically about your job. So this is kind of a wordy question, but there is a lot of talk about lower carbon emissions and new aircraft that are going to be run off of battery power, much like a Tesla or any of the other e-vehicles that are out there. Most recently, airlines are looking into biofuels and new fuels that move away from pure fossil fuel based, or oil based fuel technology. How has corporate aviation responded or is planning to respond to that type of environmental sustainability initiative?
Yeah, thanks. The sustainability word is the word du jour these days, right? It's all about green, fewer emissions, carbon focus, carbon elimination, carbon reduction. It is the focus these days for aviation. I just inherited the sustainability portfolio a few months ago, but have been working on it for a number of years, just in a different capacity, in addition to the day-to-day safety, security, and international stuff that I also help our team work on. So sustainability is a big deal, and let's think about sustainability in business aviation, not just from the airplane's perspective, or the electrical devices, the UAV, the AAM perspective, but let's think of it as a company. So think of your Fortune 500 company that you're probably familiar with. The company itself is driving the discussion about sustainability. So in our case, the flight department is a small component of usually an organization's overall carbon footprint, its emissions. And so how that flight activity plays a role in the total company contributions to carbon emissions, and then how each component of that company can effectively address, reduce, eliminate its carbon emissions is the discussion that we're having. So giant XYZ company is looking at the electricity it consumes in its buildings, the water it consumes in support of that, the transportation of its people, whether it be on the airlines, the roads, the rails, their own airplanes, taking that big picture look at what contributes to carbon emissions, and then going through and identifying what are the right strategies for each of these contributions in terms of offset. For aviation, one of the largest opportunities to offset carbon emissions is sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. And there are a variety of sources of it. It's algae, it's feedstock, it's biofuel. It's a variety of pathways that take a non-petroleum based approach to creating what at the end of the day is Jet A. At the end of the day, I'm going to get kerosene. It's going to be Jet A quality. The airplane's not going to know any different. And it's going to produce upwards of an 80% reduction in the emissions compared to traditional fossil fuel based jet fuel. Now, the reality is that there's just not enough SAF being produced today. There's 1 or 2 locations here in the United States that's actually producing SAF. It's not a lot. And so to generate the interest in SAF, there are a couple of pathways that are being used. First is actually putting SAF in fuel tanks. And today you're usually seeing a blend of somewhere between 10 and 30% of SAF per gallon of jet fuel that's going into your tank. At some airports, it could be higher, especially on the West Coast, where a lot of that fuel is being made. But in other parts of the United States, let's think Key West. Imagine how much carbon is going to be emitted getting a 10,000 gallon tank of SAF to Key West. It just doesn't make sense to expend all of that for the little bit of offset opportunity that tank is going to provide in aviation. So in those situations, there's a concept being called book and claim that's going to give remote locations the opportunity to have operators get the credits for the purchase of SAF, even though it may be being placed in somebody else's airplane. This is all about, let's think of blockchain accountability, so to speak, being applied to the assets associated with a gallon of jet fuel. So it's a really neat concept that's being explored. We're playing a role in helping to define the standards that are going to be used to define what a book and claim system ends up looking like. But the real focus, the real key is getting more SAF produced, getting it to more locations, and getting pilots to know that it's there. Let's get flight departments and people in charge of determining which FBOs get used, which airports get used, to know that it's there, that it's an option. Because today finding it is pretty hard. There are about 15 locations in the US that actually have it, but unless you know where to go look, it's not easy to find. So we're excited about where SAF is going. We're seeing the commitments that are being made across the aviation spectrum, from the commercial airline industry as a whole to airlines individually, talking about goals that they want to achieve by 2030, 2040, 2050. Business aviation and our aviation members are right there along with them, making significant commitments to what our offsets are going to look like in 10, 20, 30 years, and defining the strategies that are helping us to achieve that along the way as technology and SAF and electrification of aviation becomes more and more prominent.
Excellent. Well, that actually I'm going to skip around on you a little bit. That actually kind of leads into another question then, that, because you talked about policy and making policies. Let's keep on that subject. You've dealt a lot with policy development, an introduction at the government level, not only here, but abroad. You kind of mentioned about EASA, CASA, and that fact that you represent interests at ICAO as well. With all these incredible experiences, have you ever thought about running for office?
You raise a very good question there, Andrew, and the answer is I know where my skeletons are buried. I don't want other people finding them. So while the policy development work, I'll tell you, is incredibly satisfying. Sometimes it's like watching paint dry, just because of, in some cases, how long it takes to see things from start to fruition. Sometimes that's a timeline that takes years. But the day in, day out work with members, with experts, with policy leaders, with people who are bringing a whole variety of different perspectives to the table, some of which you may have never considered, is where the real joy is. And quite honestly, I don't think I would make a very good elected official.
I just had to throw that in there. Well, I'll ask you a question then. This is more off the cuff, but you've mentioned leadership quite a bit. And this is not a political question. This is more of a bigger, I guess, sort of question to follow it is, do you consider or do you believe that we in America right now have a leadership crisis?
Maybe let me narrow that if I could just a little bit to try and keep it focused on our audience today. Let's say leadership and aviation crisis. I think over the last several years, there have been notable examples of what has been a historic U.S. leadership role being I'm trying to think of the right word here, being assumed by another aviation leadership organization. And let me raise a specific example where the FAA's counterpart in Europe, EASA, has taken, I would say in some cases, a much more forward-leaning, much more aggressive role in addressing industry needs. Let's talk about AAM in particular. EASA has been, I would say, farther ahead of the FAA in developing standards, in developing operational guidelines for drones and for AAM, as the FAA is also trying to do the same here. What that leads to is the rest of the world asking, where do I go as a state or as an operator if I want to learn about the latest and greatest issue, the policy thinking that goes into it, and how it then gets resolved. Leadership in aviation comes not only from thinking about how do we address these really tough public policy questions. Let's stick with AAM as an example. FAA has said through a number of policy tools that they have that they own the airspace from the top of the grass, think of your backyard, from the top of the grass up to 60,000 feet, which means that for localities, think of your local town or city that may want to introduce some sort of local transportation capability that uses AAM, they're going to have to determine where do these aircraft land, what infrastructure is needed to allow them to recharge, how do they fly around or over buildings in some cases to support that local transportation need. And that's where some of the challenges come from in understanding what's the right balance between city needs, local needs, national needs, and then that international collaboration that helps us learn from each other. Over the last few years, I've seen the FAA in particular, if we're just focused on aviation, be much more aggressive in its leadership role in trying to claw back some of that, what I would say is the historic position it's held, which is one of a leadership position when it comes to most, if not all things aviation. Because the innovation is coming from a variety of different places now, whether it's coming from China, whether it's coming from Europe, from Canada, from South America, from Africa, the innovation is often compelling the regulator to get really smart about how they introduce this capability. How do they do safety risk assessments? How do they ensure the public is protected while also ensuring that the vehicle, the concept is safe and able to do what the operator or builder thinks it's going to do? So in as much as EASA has, in some cases, taken that leadership role on a couple of issues, the FAA is doing a really good job, I believe, of restoring that U.S. leadership in aviation. Yeah, we all take hits and bumps over the years when it comes to specific issues. I think the MAX, unfortunately, was a really big issue that really highlighted some potential weaknesses, but you don't get better by not learning from the past. And so I think the last 2 years have really given the FAA and the industry an opportunity to do a lot better about how aircraft are certified, what goes into that, who's held accountable. So I'm really excited about the role the FAA is taking now with bringing that leadership back. In fact, as part of the president's budget, they announced 4 new international locations that had previously been withdrawn or closed. That I think is a really measurable element of FAA's leadership role efforts to bring that back to where I think we all want to see it.
Excellent. So that's good that we're trending upward, it sounds like, and regaining some of that lost capital. But what would you say then for all of our students that are going through, obviously there's a multitude of different degrees. Most people probably have flight degrees, there's A&P, and then there's also management degrees out there. So what would you kind of say to somebody who's possibly looking to go into that management role, or if they do just purely go flight? Is there something that you would say to them that would help do their part to help bring back and instill this leadership role across the world?
Yeah, that's a multifaceted question, Andrew. Let me offer maybe just a couple of observations. The last year, I think, has been one of the best examples of having your plan B ready to go than any I can think of. Aviation is extremely cyclical, and the challenge is we don't know when the next cycle is going to happen. And so as we're looking at not only what will make your audience here a technically excellent pilot or a technically excellent A&P or a technically excellent manager, what happens the next time we face a down cycle in the industry? And so I would encourage folks to explore what is your plan B, whatever that might be. It may not be aviation. It may be a passion that you have that allows you to diversify sort of your strategy for your own success. But while aviation is definitely a career field with the opportunity for substantial satisfaction, when it turns in the wrong direction, it goes as far down as the highs often go high. And having that redundancy, that resiliency in your own capability, I think is really going to help everybody succeed, get through whatever the next cycle ends up being. So if we're talking about skill sets, what's an A&P and a pilot license are great if you're around airplanes. But if I'm not, what's then a transferable skill? Some sort of business acumen, understanding profit and loss, understanding how spreadsheets work, knowing how the basic principles of business work, very, very valuable. Know how to write well. I'll be honest, I get to look at a number of resumes that come across my desk when it comes to employment opportunities, and just finding grammatical errors on a resume really disheartens me a little bit. So finding ways to communicate well is a skill set that will follow you for life. Writing well, communicating well, reading your work before you press send is a great skill set and discipline to have, because once that email goes back, until somebody changes the ability for me to withdraw an email that I just sent, that's what people are going to read. So think about how those kinds of skill sets can play a role in a plan B scenario that you hopefully will never have to face. But we also know that the next cycle isn't necessarily going to come with a whole lot of planning. So diversification is key. Networking is key. Find those networks that you're able to tap into, that you're able to stay in touch with, that have potential opportunities that go beyond simply the right seat in something with the popular airline livery on it. If flying is your passion, understand what options are out there. The airline world has some really great opportunities. Business aviation has a heck of a lot as well. And so how to connect with them, how to connect with those opportunities, find ways to network locally. NBAA's webpage, in fact, if you just do a Google search for business aviation local groups, the very first response will take you to our webpage Well, you'll find close to 80 local and regional business aviation groups that you'll be able to connect with. Many of these groups are looking for the future of aviation, finding college graduates, people in college, people interested in aviation, and bringing them into these groups so they can see what business aviation is all about. If there isn't one near you, guess what? A lot of them are doing these virtually these days. So find a way to tap into some of the virtual events that they're doing. The business aviation community often isn't doing the job fairs. You're not going to find a lot of them out there at some of the more traditional job fairs, but you will find folks like NetJets. You will find FlexJet out there. You'll find Wheels Up that are all out there because they're competing for pilots as well. Those are big companies and they need pilots. So now's a great time. And thinking about what happens in 10, 15, 20 years when another cycle begins to rear its ugly head is important to think through now so that you're prepared, you're ready, you're able to get through whatever the next cycle brings in a way that doesn't mean a substantial amount of grief and stress for you.
Excellent. So this goes perfectly right into the next question then. Is 2020 in a big way was a very loud year for the airlines. Obviously, they made a lot of noise because of the mass furloughs and everything like that. But to a lesser extent, and kind of quietly in the background, there was business aviation doing its thing. So how did 2020 compare and contrast for business aviation compared to the airlines?
Yeah, this is a good point to make, Andrew. No part of aviation went unscathed when it came to COVID and 2020. Every component of the industry suffered. Some suffered more publicly than others, but huge chunks of our industry felt the pain, felt the layoffs. In fact, NBAA, we also had to lay off about 20% of our staff because that was the reality, and it was heartbreaking because that's not something we've ever had to do. So I think 2020 showed so many of us that making hard choices can come at the worst times. And you're not going to like what it means. But what it did show is that in some cases, there's value to aviation beyond just what we may think it may provide. The airlines switched to cargo carrying capability, and if you were in the cargo business, you probably had one of your best years ever. For our members who largely saw their aircraft, their company aircraft idled for many months, a lot of questions, a lot of struggles around how do we stay proficient, how do we get down to see our AME and get our medical renewed when nobody's seeing anyone. How do we get into the simulator for our regular training? A lot of that became a reality for so many people, whether you flew for the airlines or not. And so getting back to the advocacy piece, we started really quickly figuring out what do we need to keep pilots in the air, to keep A&Ps on the job. And we're able to work with the FAA to put together an SFAR, a Special Federal Aviation Regulation, SFAR 118, which outlined all these extensions that hopefully, I'm sure many of you probably saw, gave you an extra 3 months to get to your AME for your medical, gave you an extra 3 months on your regular proficiency flying. That was huge. That kept so many of our folks flying. And that also allowed our folks to really demonstrate the value of the airplane. If touch points became the measure of flying commercially or flying on the company plane, we had some really smart people put together some analysis that showed touch points in commercial aviation exceeded about 300. And by touch points, I mean, how many activities are you physically engaging or touching with somebody or something to get from where you're going to where you need to be? So think of that entire journey. Where in business aviation, that was somewhere around 30. So a 90% decrease in touch points. And when you're talking about a commutable disease, that's a big deal. We want to lessen exposure. And so the business aircraft became a huge tool. Pfizer, in fact, during a safety seminar held earlier this month, said their airplane contributed to that vaccine getting approved weeks earlier than if they would have had to use commercial sources for transportation. Taking the vaccine from labs in the central US over to Europe, where the different components of the manufacturing process needed to get involved, was only going to be possible in the timeline they wanted to achieve with use of the company airplane. And that's really where some of these stories really highlighted the value of having that asset available when it was needed. Yes, there were lots of pilots who weren't flying for weeks and months, and they took the airplane up just to stay current. And that's not often what we want to see the airplanes being used for. But in addition to proficiency flying and getting vaccines made, a lot of charitable work was going on as well, moving first responders from places where they were to where they needed to be, moving medical supplies from Asia into the United States to help with some of that initial PPE demand that there was just no way to keep up with. That's where we saw a lot of the value for business aviation happening on the front line, often out of sight, often not covered in the news, but playing a really significant role to the communities where these companies and these airplanes live.
Excellent. That's a great story about that too. So on that, since we're thinking about vaccines and safety, let's talk about what initiatives the NBAA is currently involved in to increase corporate aviation safety.
Oh, well, I don't think we have enough time, so I'll try and keep it short here, because safety is day in and day out the thing I focus on most. Business aviation. Let's define that if we could. The traditional Part 91 flight department, flown with 2 pilots, well trained, has a safety record as good as the airlines, and in some cases better. But when we look at business aviation broadly, there are definitely opportunities for us to improve. And so when we look at some of the top things that we think really can help contribute to that, at the top of that list is data. Data is really driving how we're defining intervention strategies across a whole host of components of aviation. When we think of the great flight operations quality assurance work that the airlines developed starting about 25 years ago, taking all that flight data recorder information and doing something with it and learning things that they didn't know were going on. Business aviation is learning from that as well, getting that data into the system, fusing it with other sources of data. So we've got a much better view of how the system and the community is performing that doesn't rely on simply bent metal and broken bones. That clearly is a statement that shows that something we either are doing or we have done isn't working, and we need to get to it before it happens there. Professionalism and a focus on what professionalism means is also a big deal. We've had a couple of very unfortunate accidents over the past couple of years that they're just the worst of the worst. You think this kind of stuff doesn't happen out there, but it does. If you have a chance to take a look at a Learjet crash that happened at Teterboro a couple of years ago, I think it was 2017, 2018, just go through the cockpit voice recorder and think about how you would feel in a cockpit that had that kind of discussion going on. It's heartbreaking to read. And so as we have these opportunities to talk with people about what's the company culture like that reinforces or allows this kind of situation to be manifest and to continue, that's definitely a big part of what we're working on. And finally, this is probably no surprise, but fatigue remains a very big issue, not just for business aviation, but for everyone. As the commercial airline industry spins back up, as the lack of pilots and lack of airplanes contribute to everybody being used to their maximum extent possible, a lot of people are tired. Same goes for business aviation, whether you're flying in the 135 or the 91 world, there's a lot of demand to put those assets to work. And so how are we managing the constant tension between maximum performance and the realities of poor performance of pilots when they get tired. None of us perform well after we've been up for a long while, and we're currently involved in a rulemaking effort that will attempt to update the flight and duty regulations for the Part 135 world, hopefully in the next year or two as it works its way through the federal system. So safety is a big deal. In fact, our safety committee is tools, processes, recommendations to help everyone. And nbaa.org/safety takes you to all of our publicly available safety information. None of the stuff on our website dealing with safety is ever protected for members only. We strongly believe that whatever we develop should be shared widely and to anybody who wants to use it. Because if we're not safe, not only in action, in reality, but in perception, we've lost a whole lot of credibility on why we're such an essential part of the industry.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, that could have probably taken its own 1 hour session. So let's talk about the security aspect then of your business before we get to the more waxing poetic at the end of this. Talk a little bit about security. Whenever most people think about security in aviation, it's either they think of the TSA or they think of 1-800-GA Secure, and that's pretty much about it. What are these security initiatives look like for the NBAA?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that even though you may not see magnetometers and X-ray machines, doesn't necessarily mean there's no security going on either. You know about all the work that the FAA and the TSA do. All of us that have a pilot certificate, any kind of certificate from the FAA, a tower cab controller, a dispatcher, an AMP, and any kind of FAA certificate daily gets run through the no-fly and selectee list. They're always looking for people of interest, and so just the fact that we're interacting with aviation means we're being looked at. The physical security equation becomes a little different because, in our view, the security risk should reflect the security measures. So in the commercial airline world, we've got a couple hundred people that most of us don't know, all getting on the same aircraft with unknown intentions. And so as a result, that's where we generally see the government approach having the most amount of security. We all go through X-ray machines, we all go through magnetometers. We're looking for specific risk items, flammable liquids, we're looking for ammunition, we're looking for guns, weapons, all sorts of things, so that when we're all put together in that giant flying tube, we're not a risk either to each other or to the flight. In business aviation, the risk profile is different. Generally, we all know each other. Generally, we're all flying for the same reason to the same destination for the same purpose. And so the risk that flight creates in terms of a security perspective is different. And so they've got different measures that reflect the risk associated with that flight. So while you may not see magnetometers and X-ray machines for every 135 flight, there are other things that are being done to ensure that there's not a risk associated with that flight. And depending on where you're going, you may have substantial security requirements regardless of who you are. So DCA, a very unique airport these days, very protected airspace around here. There's a program that allows non-commercial aircraft to fly into DCA. It's called the DCA Access Standard Security Program. And it essentially brings sterile area security measures in an airport to every flight in and out of DCA. There are about 120 or so last points of departure located throughout the United States where a non-commercial business aviation flight or even a Part 135 flight can get screened, have their passengers screened, and fly into DCA. So it very much is a risk-based approach, as it should be, to security. And our view is to try and not let security diminish the value of the asset that you've invested in to help you achieve your business goals. That's why these companies invest millions of dollars in these aircraft, to be able to use them. And we just don't want the policies involved with flying the aircraft to diminish the value of what they've invested.
Excellent point. Excellent point. So tell us one great story about your job that people would be surprised to hear.
Well, my frequent flyer account generally gets pretty high, and I have to struggle to find a way to use it. My travel has taken me to some pretty incredible places around the globe, all because of business. Bali, Indonesia, Singapore, most of the countries in Europe, Moscow and St. Petersburg, Bangkok, Thailand, even Vietnam, several places in South America. I feel like I need a Canadian citizen permit for Montreal because I'm usually up there several times. The travel associated with this particular job, I would say, is second to none in terms of the fulfillment, the opportunity, the excitement that I get. Every now and then you get to run into some pretty cool people. Several years ago, I had a chance to go to the White House during, for those of you who remember those days, we had lots of problems with delays and airspace congestion. And we were part of a team that tried to help that and got to meet the president at the time, President Clinton, on that effort. It's an opportunity, or the job brings with it opportunities that may come once in a lifetime. No day is the same, and that's probably why this is such a pretty cool place to work.
There we go. Couldn't get it come back up. Excellent. Thank you. So you kind of talked about this, touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'm going to fine tune it just a little bit. And I know we got about 10, 15 minutes left here. So what is a recommendation you can give to somebody graduating this coming year if they are looking to go into corporate aviation or aviation management in general? So now we're going to hone it down a little bit from that more broad perspective into specifically corporate aviation.
Sure. Don't wait. Start now. Start getting your name out now with those networks. We've got at NBAA, we've got a YoPro Council, Young Professional Council, that's really focused on helping bring new energy, new people into business aviation. You can find it on our website. Do a Google search. It won't be that hard to find. But its whole focus is designed around having young people in our industry talk with young people about what this industry is like. What have they liked about it? How did they get in? What strategies would they recommend? I think my strategy, quite honestly, may look a little bit different from what some of the people that work for me that are recent graduates might say. So it's important to be getting not only valuable but relevant insight about what worked for them, the kinds of things that they brought into their own experience that could be shared. So if there's one thing to do, it's start networking today. Don't wait until you have that diploma on your wall before you start talking with people. Understand what business aviation is. What I find is that in business aviation, it's rarely about, are you a competent pilot? Do you have a rating? Are you able to fly an instrument approach? Can you fly a single engine go around? That's going to be expected. What generally I see these companies wanting to look for is a compatible employee for their company culture. So think about the company that owns the aircraft, not just the aircraft. Do they make a product you like? Are you excited? Are you a fanboy or fangirl about whatever the product is? Do you sign up for their announcements whenever they come up? Do you like what they do? That, to me, I think plays an even greater role when it comes to business aviation than only the fact that you're probably a really great pilot, because they're going to ask you likely to do things far beyond just fly the airplane. And that's where the fun really begins, because you're going to be tapped into company plans. You're going to be going places that you're going to read about in the Wall Street Journal in 12 hours because deals have just been signed. They're going to want to know you're trustworthy, that you're going to be able to protect company assets and company information and company secrets that are critical to the long-term success of the organization. That's where a lot of the fun comes in with business aviation. And oh, by the way, most of the time, the crew stays where the passengers go. so that's definitely, if there's a perk I would say that's probably a good one. That you're not looking necessarily at staying near the airport. You're probably going wherever the passengers are going, because philosophically, you don't want to split that team up. If the pilots get separated from the passengers, neither of them is able to do the job. So think about how your own personal values, your own ideals, your own goals intersect with companies that you might want to work for. Chances are, if you know the company, they probably have an airplane. And then how are you going to bring value beyond just the aircraft and the skills that you have in flying the aircraft to the company? Because they're probably going to open doors that you honestly didn't know existed once you find a way into that company. NBAA can definitely be a resource. Happy to connect folks to resources for connecting locally with groups and organizations that can help you with this. And NIFA, I know, does such a great job with the advocacy, with connecting and bringing people together. It's great to use these networks and opportunities to highlight where's the right person at the right company at the right time to help me do what I want to do.
Thank you. And then for the final question before we start getting into wrapping everything up, looking back, and this is going to be kind of tough, but if you were to name one thing in your career that brings you the most pride, what would it be and why?
This is going to seem simple, but it's also easy. It's probably my time flight instructing back at SIU. Signing off your first private pilot. My first private pilot that I signed off flies for Southwest, and we're still in touch. That's the kind of satisfaction that I would say is really hard to find, because the work that you put in as an instructor, the growth that you see coming from your student, all of that working towards a first solo, a first cross country, they're passing their exam, they're written and they're practical with the FAA. Wow, all of that is just so exciting, and you see the fruits of your labor in a very material, very visible way, and that to me probably has been one of the highlights of my entire time in aviation. Just seeing the opportunities that these people are now getting because they're following their own passion. They're getting to do something they've always wanted to do, and you played a small little role in helping them get there. That to me has been really one of the best things I think I can look back on.
Excellent. Yeah, as stressful as that time is, it certainly has its rewards. So I can connect with that. It's funny, I got one more thing that I thought I forgot to add or forgot to mention, is that you talked about young professionals. Actually, our next month's moderator is one of your young professionals, Julia Harrington. So it's cool that how these young, they really do go and expand outward and everything. So that's been a very, very cool program. She's had a lot of fun being involved with it too. So yeah, I just want to give a shout out to that. So that program really I've seen it have some really positive results. So thank you guys.
That's
for doing
great.
That. I've got just a few closing comments, but is there anything you would like to say in closing?
I've had the opportunity to get to one or two NIFAs. Really, some of the most amazing events that I've ever seen. The commitment, the passion, the energy that the teams have there is really just awesome. I got to keep rooting for the Salukis to do what they do, because I love seeing them finish in the top three like they did this year. Always hoping for two or for one, and those wins are hard fought. So congrats to the teams that won this year. But man, what a great competition. NBAA would love to be back in some way and support that effort, and hopefully be on the front line with all of you again here real soon.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug. So thank you once more, Doug Carr, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to talk with you as always. For everybody else watching and submitting questions, thank you very much for that. If, as Doug mentioned earlier, he'd be happy to, if offline, if you think of anything, I can connect you and forward these questions on through either myself, the Speaker Series email, or anything else that we have. Our next speaker is going to be sometime the second week of July. We are working on that right now. As I said, Julie Harrington's going to host that one with Patty Wagstaff. So you'll be seeing more information on that coming through, as well as the recording of this conversation will be on the website here shortly. So I want to thank everybody for stopping by. Thank you again, Taylor, for introducing. Thank you, Adam Stifler in the background for working, and Team Blake and Brandon for helping out with this. And once more, Doug, thank you for stopping by. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you
Bye.
out there someday.